I want to start out by saying how thankful I am for all of you being here today. As I stand before you, it's truly remarkable to see all the people that had a connection and that loved my dad and were loved by him. I know he's here, smiling down on all of us, wiping away the tears that we've shed with a happy memory or two. Because that's the beautiful thing about life, is that each of us has a different remembrance, a different moment shared that we get to cherish with my dad forever. The problem that I have today is that I face a truly impossible task. You see, we're all here to celebrate and honor my dad's life and soul because he meant so much and so much differently to each of us. Dad was too hardworking a dentist, too great a husband, too loving a father and brother and son, and too loyal a friend to be summed up in a mere eulogizing speech. It can't be done justly by anyone except for perhaps God himself. But with that being said, I'm going to incorporate one of his many teachings and try my best, as he always did. I will do my best as his son to honor his life and the legacy that he has left behind for all of us. I think that some of us can fall into the trap of focusing only on this last year and the illness that afflicted my dad in his final days. While ALS is what claimed him, it is not what defined him. So I will define the parts of my father before first talking about the last year of his journey with ALS. One of the many things I loved about my dad was how easy I could talk to him. No question was off limits. He was never judgmental and always a great listener. These are some of the many things that strengthened the bond I shared with him personally as father and son, and I know it's what my family as well, and it's what I also believe nurtured many of the relationships he held with all of you. I was always interested in all aspects of my father's life, as most children are, and I always questioned him, perhaps too much at some times. But of the many things I learned about his life, one that struck me hard was that my father worked from the day he was 6 years old. Many of us can't imagine what that's like, but my dad's early life working in the orchards of Wenatchee, Washington was only natural to him and his family. It was a lifestyle, and it was a lifestyle of values and of endless work. And it was through this upbringing that I believe my dad adopted his drive and his will for perfection. If you knew my dad at all, you knew he was a perfectionist. On the farm, it had to be done right or it had to be redone. And that was the creed by which my father tackled everything in his life. Because if it's not done right, why do it at all? Every day my father woke up, his clothes had to be just right, pressed, ironed, and most importantly in style. His hair was shaped ever so carefully, and his posture was always erect and sturdy. And he did these things not to impress other people, but simply because he wanted to look and be his best at all times. He carried himself as a symbol that good simply wasn't great enough, that the best foot should always be put forward in everything that anyone does. And all my life, I've never seen anyone work as hard or as perfectly as my father worked in dentistry. My dad agonized ensuring that each procedure went perfectly, but sometimes procedures wouldn't go as planned for one reason or another. And there were times where my father quite literally had sleepless nights worrying about his patients. I asked him one day, I said, "Dad, why do you stress so much?" My analogy and perspective for the longest time was always, Dad, in school, a 90% is an A for me. Why would I go for the 100? It's going to be the same grade. And he always said, because people deserve the very best that I can give them. He not only worked hard, he cared. And striving for perfection was his tool to help others. On weekends or late at night, I often overheard my father calling his patients just to check in on them and see how they were doing. And these are generic names, so don't feel called out. "Hey, Bob, is that tooth feeling okay? I'm sorry I hurt you today, Susan. That wasn't my intention. Is there anything I can do to help you or make you feel more comfortable the next time?" These were not rare questions. They were common occurrences. It's something my dad always strove to do. That kind of care, dedication, and give-it-your-all attitude is too rare a thing in this world, but it's what my father did each day of his life. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you today, of several things, is to honor my dad by working hard and doing your best in whatever field that might be. As you probably know, my father was a man who knew who he was and he knew what he stood for. He was humble and never boastful. He did his best, but he also held pride in the fact that he was a man of his word and doing what was right. I'm proud to say that my father kept every one of his promises to me. He came to all my sporting events, my speeches, and even those elementary school musicals that don't mean anything. But he was there for me always and in everything. And if he said he was going to do something, he did it. There's no exception to this rule, and I can't thank him enough for that. Honor and integrity weren't just concepts to him, they were actions. And these actions were displayed in full effect at a construction job my dad held in college. You see, he was a hard worker, and it was one of the many jobs that he had. And on this particular day, he was digging in a pit, and the foreman had said, be careful because there is a strong possibility of cave-ins, and it was held up by scaffolding. And so my dad, a woman, and another man went into the pit, and lo and behold, on this day, the foreman yelled down to them and said, "Cave in, cave in." So the first man, who was closest, scrambled to the ladder. And my dad, he was quite fast at that time, sprinted right next, and he was on the ladder. And he looked up, and then he looked back. And when he looked back, the woman was caught in the sand, and she couldn't get out. And he had a choice: scramble up that ladder to save himself or go back. And we all know what he did. He went back, and when I asked him, he said he didn't know where the strength had come from. But he raced over and picked this woman up. Maybe it's Dad's fairy tale, I don't know. Picked her up one-armed. I'm going to honor what he said. Picked her up one-armed. Set him in front of himself. Made sure she had made it halfway up the ladder before he did. And seconds later, it caved in, and it would have killed all of them. We are all going to face the choice between what is right and what is easy in our lives. It is easy to say we will do something to a small child and then fail to deliver. It's easy to ignore a problem or a fault that we possess and sweep it under the rug. But when you're on that ladder looking back at someone caught in the sand, I hope you choose to do what's right, as my father always did. It's this way of honor that my dad led by example, and he helped our family to become what it is. The best part about my family and my father is the love we all shared. Many people dread going home to see their families for vacations, or even coming home from college, or even just having family time. But it was something that each of us treasured above all else. To me, my father wasn't just my dad. He was my mentor who could answer even the most difficult questions. He was my hero who showed me between right and wrong. He was my protector against the dark crevices of this world, and he was my best friend. I know I speak for my mom and sister too with these aspects. We genuinely treasured each other. Family was first for Dad, and all other things were secondary. My family learned that from his example. He wanted us to be happy, no matter where we found that happiness, and he often said that he had the most joy when he watched my sister, my mom, and me when we were most happy. He was always so selfless like that. And he was even selfless and caring about us when he faced death. And I'm not talking about ALS. This was long before. In junior high, we went on vacation. We were in California, one of my best memories. And it just so happened that day we were going to go boogie boarding. And so we jumped into the waves, and it hadn't been 15 minutes, and all seemed well, when a man popped out of the waves. And we almost didn't recognize him, but he shouted, "Jared, Lauren, get out of the water." And so we did. We did what Dad said. We didn't know what the reason was. But he came up on shore, and his face was all bloody, and his nose was crooked this way. His bottom teeth were all knocked out. And we said, "Dad, what happened?" And he told us later that he had caught a wave that had smacked him down into the water and right into a rock. And he said, "I thought I was going to die. I thought that was it. I saw the stars, I saw the light. But then I thought, oh my God, if this is what's happening to me, what in the world is happening to Jared and Lauren?" Family was everything to my father, and it's everything to me. I would ask you to put your loved ones first, because they are truly and only what matters. I know I've been talking for a little bit here, but lastly, I want to talk about strength. I always admired how strong physically my father was. In football, he broke his hand, and he went right back in the game anyway. He tore his Achilles heel in old man soccer, walked all the way to the car, and drove himself to the hospital, while kindly giving my mother a phone call that he was going to get surgery and return to work the next day. He sliced his hand open in our kitchen, and each of these times there was never the slightest whimper or even hint at a tear shed. That's just a brief glimpse of the physical strength. And many of you might think that ALS took his strength away. But it was ALS that also revealed the true power and extent of his physical and mental abilities. You see, my father found out his diagnosis in September of 2013. And looking at him, and even the things he did, you wouldn't have known it. Me and my sister found out 2 months later. 2 whole months. We had no idea what my father and mom were going through. And he hid it from us and acted like everything was okay. Why? Because he was protecting us, as he always did. But this wasn't just for our family. He acted like everything was okay at work. He showed up with a smile on his face and the same work ethic that he had used all his life. The world was crashing down upon him, and yet he ensured that his patients, his staff, his friends, and his family were all okay before he was. I asked my dad often how he was doing, and later I asked if he was afraid. His answer was that he feared what death would do to our family. He feared how we would go on. He feared that the patients that he had dedicated so much time to wouldn't get the care that they deserved. He feared that his office staff would crumble and that the dream he worked so hard to build would turn to dust. And yet never did I ever hear him say he feared for himself. That's the definition of true selflessness. Favorite quote of mine is that death smiles at us all, and all we can do is smile back. And that's exactly what my father did. The entire time he fought ALS, he kept his sense of humor, always quick to throw in a joke, even if it was abrupt and inappropriate to himself. He always had an I can do it attitude, and he took joy in being able to do anything that he set his mind to. When he lost the use of his right arm, he would still greet my sister and I at our cars. Quick to try and grab as many bags as he could to help us. When he started to lose his legs, he still walked far farther than anyone should have been able to, determined not to use a wheelchair until the last possible moment. When he lost his ability to move everything but his left forearm, he prayed like this. As he had the other 54 years of his life, he did his best. And he had cared for so many people in dentistry the last year of his life. Oh, sorry, I had to get one mistake. As he had cared for so many people in dentistry the last year of his life, he connected in a different way. Family had come first, and now it was also a year of friendships. He talked often about how talking with all of you guys, the problems, the real-life questions, and anything else that was on your mind made him feel alive. It made him feel like he had a purpose. My Uncle Jim put it beautifully. Jeff acted as a light for other people. He was struggling with a disease that would claim his life, but he remained faithful, positive, and selfless the entire time. The light in my father never went out. He lost his body, but not the smile, not the love, and not himself. As my father was on the ladder that led to death, it would have been easy to leave the rest of us behind. It would have been easy to ignore our feelings and focus only on himself. It would have been easy to give up and turn to negativity and hate and all the other dark things of this world. But my father never chose easy. He chose what was right. He chose to act as a beacon of light in the darkness of this world, to keep doing his best, to keep trying for perfection, to do what was right, and to care for his family above all else. I talked earlier about my father keeping his promises. I said he kept every one, and he did. Every time I left for school, I would drive home and I'd cry because I knew that it could be the last time that I'd drive away and see him. So this time was no different. This was Thanksgiving. And my family just found this out. But I went to his bedside after they had gone outside, and I said, Dad, I have to see you again. I can't say goodbye today. I have to be there when you pass. And I left. And he said, son, I promise that you'll be there. And I left, and I knew that was a promise he couldn't keep. And I know now he's looking down, what, you doubted me? Pastor Easley mentioned the story of him fighting for his life with every breath. And this is that story, and this is where I'll end. Friday, December 12th, I got a phone call that my dad would likely pass today. And actually, no, I called home. I knew something was wrong. I knew something wasn't right. And I called my mom, and she was in tears, and her voice was cracking, and she said, son, I need you and your sister to come home today. This was the day that I had dreaded, and I knew it would come. And my Uncle Kevin, my dad's brother, gave me a gift I'll never be able to give back. He raced all the way to Pullman to come get us because he knew we were in no condition to drive. And he drove us back. But before I left the house, I had said, Mom, I need you to put Dad on. And that whole night, he couldn't breathe. But I said, Dad, I love you. I'm coming to see you. And even though he could barely say anything, he said, son, I love you, and I'm going to see you. I'll hang on. So we drove, and that whole 4.5 hours, he was fighting for his life. He had one foot in the physical and one in the spiritual, but he kept fighting, and my mom said that it was a battle that It was unlike any other football game he'd ever played in. This was some battle that none of us, I hope, will ever have to face. And he hung on, and we made it to the house and came in, and they had said he had been fighting. He was struggling to breathe. He didn't say a word. But we came in, and you saw the smile come on his face. I got to spend the last half hour with my dad. I got to tell him I love him. I got to give him a hug, and I'm so grateful for that. He hung on, and he kept his final promise, even though he knew that he might not be able to keep it. But that was a dad's guarantee, and that's what it meant. I've asked a lot of you today. I've asked you to do your best, live with integrity, and finally to love. Love. It's the only thing that truly matters. When my dad had finally passed away, I took this out. I was by myself. I had to get away from the house just for a little bit. And I opened it up, and the first contact I saw was Dad. This was the first message that I would never be able to call my father again. And so I want to ask you lastly, for those of you that are still lucky to have your dads, tell them that you love them, call them. I don't care where they're at. But not just your dads, tell your family, tell your friends, tell your children, your brothers, your sisters, everyone, because they are all that matters, and you don't know when that last time is going to be. Tell those you love to honor my father. And I want to say lastly that this is not my dad's end. This is my dad's beginning, and we will all see him again one day. He's always been a light, and now he's just leading the way again. I love you, Dad. Thank you.